so much for the support. Right now, I'm joined by the man on the street for Michigan in D.C. He is Michigan's 11th District House of Representative member. He's a former cellmate of mine, an ex-drinking buddy. Hello, Thaddeus McCotter. Welcome.
Hey, Thayrone.
What's up, man?
Well, campaigns, as you well know, are heating up in earnest.
Listen, before we get into this, before we get into just a bunch of campaign yammering on, I want to ask you something really, really, really important. Are you still playing a Stratocaster through a Fender amp?
Oh yeah. Well, I got a Stratocaster my brother won't give me back that he borrowed.
What?
Yeah, Dinky likes the Strat. Put some new
Stratocaster is the coolest guitar
he
ever.
refuses to give it back at the present time, so we're in a bit of a standoff. I like the Telecaster myself, and I usually play it through my Music Man 112RD.
I've got that amp in the basement. It's too heavy to lift. It's like a Volkswagen. Every time I take it anywhere, somebody offers to buy it. That's one of the finest amps in the history of mankind.
Oh yeah, I've had it since high school, and it is. You're right. It's not for the faint of heart to carry that thing around.
No, but it sounds great. That's Leo Fender's. He put that together after he sold Fender.
Yeah, I've never needed another amp.
And I'll tell you, before we get off of this subject, and I could go on forever, we could talk about this for the next hour, but Stratocaster guitar, I would argue if you had to be trapped on a desert island with 4 to 5 dentists, you want a Stratocaster. That's it. End of story. They're all good, but a Stratocaster, that's it.
Yeah, well, Strat, Tele. I kind of like the Tele now, but I guess I'm getting older.
Well, the Telecaster comes in handy as a canoe paddle. It also works out really well in a bar fight. I don't know if you've ever had to deal with that. But.
No, but I saw Keith Richards, I think, in the movie Let's Spend the Night Together. Somebody came up on stage in the 81 tour, and I think they showed him whacking him with it.
That's the perfect guitar for that. And I'll tell you something else about that their Telecaster, which is really cool, is you can't get a bad sound out of it, which it's good stuff. Hey, let's talk about the election and what's coming up. Please tell everybody everything you need to know about keeping the conservatives in the House and adding more.
Well, I think that the one thing that Republicans and conservatives have to guard against is the sense that somehow the polling is going to dictate the outcome. As you know, Thayrone, when the polls are down, they tell you to ignore them, and I think it's just as important to ignore them when you're up.
Yeah.
You have to run as hard as you can, and we're heading towards the finish line, and this is no time to let up or take false comfort in polls, which are really just snapshots of the public mood at any given time.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. Whenever I hear somebody polling or somebody's you hear this on every talking head news broadcast on television. Well, this poll, that, forget it, throw it out. If we learned anything, look at what was it, Dewey and Truman. We don't go by polling. We go by conservatives must stay strong and not fragment. Now, you're a Republican. Let me ask your take on the Tea Parties. What do you think? Are the Tea Parties people that we need to bring into the umbrella, or the Republicans need to come under the umbrella of Tea Parties? What's your take on that?
Well, I think the first thing you did, Thayrone, is your want, is you hit the nail on the head. You said Tea Parties. What you're seeing is a spontaneous, organic grassroots movement, and they're community-based. There's not one monolithic Tea Party movement, which is some of the stuff we saw on the left the last 2 elections. What you're seeing is they're coming out. These are people who are upset about the direction of the country, many of them who have never participated in politics in a fashion in which they're participating now. And each community's Tea Party is different because that's the beauty of America. Different communities, different perspectives. But they all agree on certain basic elements. And I think that where they converge with the Republican Party should be welcoming to those who wish to join the party. There's crossover between Republican volunteers that are in Tea Parties and vice versa. So what you do not want to do, though, is you do not want to come in as the Republican, quote-unquote, Washington establishment and try to co-opt the Tea Parties, because I think that will be, more than anything, alienate the individuals who are becoming politically active.
Yeah, and the Tea Parties are we the people. Whenever anybody says they have a problem with that or you hear this derogatory term, I'm saying that's your mom out there. That's your grandma on her walker with her blue hair out there. It is the voice of we the people.
Yes, and I think that's why the left so despises the Tea Parties.
Yes.
Is because they believe that it's stolen their narrative. As you know, all we ever hear from the quote-unquote mainstream media is the fact that it is the left that takes to the streets to peacefully petition government for the redress of sundry wrongs. And the reality is that the Tea Parties were not grassroots like much of what we saw of the left the last 2 elections. Instead, these are really people just finding a way to express their concerns and to make their voice heard by government. So when the left looks at the Tea Parties, not only do they have a sense that they obviously don't agree with the philosophy behind them, but they also, I think, get very irritated at the fact that what the Tea Parties are doing is exactly what the left always claims to do.
Yeah, and I think the Tea Party, in large part, the local Tea Parties, I've spoken at a couple, I think you have too, I think they're really onto something here, and that is, let's stop stealing our money and just throwing it down a black hole. Let's look responsibly at what we need tax dollars for. What's the size? What's a reasonable size for government? They're painted sometimes as crazy people that want to do away with all government, take us back in time, and that's nothing could be further from the truth.
I think that the spending is a large part of it. Excuse me, but it also is symptomatic of the underlying angst that the nation we've inherited is not going to be bequeathed to our children. America is an exceptional nation. It is a revolutionary experiment in self-government and liberty, and every generation has to do their best not only to preserve it, but to help to promote those ideals so that their children can pick it up and try to do the same. And when you see the size of the government growing, when you see the intrusion of the government in people's lives, and you see what people intuit as the decline of American exceptionalism, which is most typified by government's out-of-control spending or taxation or the health care bill, I think that when people look at the Tea Parties, they think it's all about the spending, but I would argue that when you see these men and women coming forward, what's really driving them is not only the spending, which is egregious, but it's also that deeper sense that the greatness of the nation is being decimated by its own servant government.
Now, I don't know how often you catch the show or if you get a chance to do it at all, but my basic premise is that if it's got a D after its name, drive a stake through the heart of it, polling-wise, and if it's got an R after its name, elected. And the strategy is that we're in a war, and the battle coming up, one of the skirmishes / battles coming up, is in November. And what we need to do is first break the Democrat stranglehold. Then we, the people, surround you guys with ours after your names, and we say, we now want you to do certain things that aren't getting done. Where do you stand with that?
Well, I think there's direct participation between servant representatives in Congress and their constituents is what the process requires to hold people accountable. Again, I was out today in Garden City, and I was talking to a man, and I referred to government as his servant, and he was shocked because he hadn't heard that phrase in quite some time.
Yeah.
And so I think you have to know that when you go into this, this is actually a demotion from the status of sovereign citizen. You're now a servant. That's how the system was designed. We have a republic, a constitutional free republic. And so when this occurs, you're going to have President Obama for another 2 years at least. You're going to have, hopefully, divided government within the Congress, with the Republicans in both chambers or one. And I think that what that has to do is instruct individuals that things are not going to change overnight. And I think that when we look at the independents especially, they do want that gridlock back. They do not trust either party right now. And the one they trust least is the one in power. The first thing Republicans have to do, and this is where the Tea Partiers and all citizens are going to be very helpful, is to make sure that the Republican rehabilitation on the road to redemption continues with their oversight and guidance, and I think that will be helpful.
I like the way you put that. We don't want a government just as our servant. We want it as our servant with a shock collar on it. Now,
electronic tethering.
What's going on with, let's see how much time we have. Can you stick around for another break?
Yep.
I want to talk to you further. My guest is Thaddeus McCotter. He's one of the good guys. We're going to talk with him after the break. He is your House of Representatives member in the 11th District. For listening. Let's get back to my guest. I'm joined with Republican House member Thaddeus McCotter. And Thaddeus, welcome back.
Thanks, Thayrone. Thanks.
Hey, I want to talk about your movie, but before we, I Want Your Money. Before we get into that, can you tell folks listening? I know we've heard quite a bit about whatever they're called, the young guns. I think it's conservative Republicans that are kind of poised and ready to strike, if you will, get a lot of stuff done fairly quickly. I know you've got a guy that's got to sign legislation at the top, but you guys control funding. You also have subpoena power. What happens when we take back the House? Are the young guns ready to make some serious changes?
I think the young guns that you're referring to are three of our members, ironically, two of whom are older than me.
That's what I was going to ask. Why aren't you one of the young guns, man?
No, I'm an adult. But when we look at the House as a whole, what you're going to see, Thayrone, is oversight, accountability, transparency that was so lacking in the past. And you'll see committee chairs such as my colleague Darrell Issa, who has just been a bulldog in his minority ranking member position, trying to get to the bottom of much of how the sausage in that factory has been made of late. I think you're also going to see attempts, given the fact that the president is there, to reduce spending, and that will clearly mean the need to defund aspects of legislation which was passed, notably in the health care bill, such as rationing provisions or others that could lead to it, that the American people certainly do not want their money spent implementing when they so opposed it before it was enacted into law. So I think these are things that are, as we talked about earlier, the people across the country are going to be looking at Republicans and making sure that we follow through with.
Well, across the country, that's excellent you made that point, because I'd argue that it's not about bringing home the bacon in your own district more anymore. More, it's about what's going on in our country. I mean, things like the border's wide open, kids go to school, don't learn a damn thing. And again, it took 20-some years to get here. We're not going to turn around overnight. You made that point in the last segment, and I get that. But it starts somewhere, and I think it starts with a very, very conservative House saying we are going to make a difference. We're not going to fall into the 94 pitfall where we squandered our majority.
Well, I think you're right. And I think one of the things the American people are looking for is the recognition by government of the things that people have had to do and businesses have had to do. When you think about it, Thayrone, you live in a communications revolution, an innovation age, the age of globalization. Families and job creators have had to restructure their operations or their family budgets to meet the future. It's a highly competitive world. People have had to become more nimble, more accountable, more prepared for the future. Government is the only entity that has resisted this, and it's done so, not only stubbornly, but I would say doggedly. When you think about it, the reason that occurs is government spends what it takes, and you can only spend what you make. So when you look at the stimulus, you look at the massive government spending that is occurring in the last 4 years under a Democratic-controlled Congress, or the last 2 years under a completely controlled government, federal government by the Democratic Party. They're really spending your money to try to prop up a big government model that is no longer operative in the age of globalization. And Americans get this. It's not been necessarily articulated by Republicans or Democrats, but they understand what they've had to do to make it through this difficult time, and they understand the sacrifices that they expect their servant government to make. And the longer they watch the government not do it, the more irate they are. I think that to a certain extent they're very tuned in with the dichotomy that is non-sustainable, that you cannot have a 1965 Lyndon Johnson model of big government placed on a globalized world. You need a consumer-driven economy matched with a citizen-driven government.
Well, I certainly hope that they're waking up. I use this analogy quite a bit. I think a lot of times they're hypnotized by the bright, shiny object of dancing with the vaguely familiar. They call it Dancing with the Stars. But quite seriously, I'm hoping people are waking up. A lot of people are just completely narcoticized by what time's the game on.
Well, I think it's important to remember what Lincoln said. Why should there not be a patient confidence in the ultimate justice of the people? Is there any better or equal hope in this world? My answer as a conservative Republican is no, and it certainly isn't going to be found in Washington politicians.
Right. Let's talk about your movie here. Now, you're a movie star. Tell us about that.
Well, it's not my movie, Dave. I'm just in it.
Right, I know. Tell us about the movie. I've seen the trailer. It looks most excellent. Tell us all about it.
Yeah, it's not risque, man, so I was concerned you might not be interested.
No, that's okay. I'm a good, solid citizen down deep inside.
Well, it's done by Ray Griggs, and it's about, obviously, the fiscal mess in Washington, and as individuals like myself will come on and talk about the situation, some of the solutions. But what makes I Want Your Money so novel, Thayrone, is that they used this fascinating to me because I don't understand it, but this wonderful animation to help narrate where we are and how we got there. And I think that if you've seen it, there's a trailer out there already, and it's been on YouTube. It's got over 3 million hits on YouTube. And I would have people coming up to me saying, "Well, you're in this movie," and I'd say, "Well, that's nice. How do you know about this?" And they'd seen it on YouTube, or they'd heard about it through the grassroots. I think the Tea Partiers are taken to it, and a whole lot of people are paying attention to this movie that's coming out, I think, October 15th. Now, again, that doesn't mean I'm going to get me an entourage or a hairdresser. Obviously, I can't do that because I'm bald.
But you can get backstage passes for me and my wife.
Yeah, I'll get you backstage. I won't be there.
When you get your Grammy,
I'll get you some backstage passes.
Or when you get your Oscar, we can. No, this is called "I Want Your Money."
Wieners, but
I Want Your Money is the name of this. You can get over there, folks, to YouTube and just surf it out. If you just type in on Google "I Want Your Money" or go over to YouTube and type it in there. This is an amazing trailer. You say this is coming out October 15th. You mean in theaters or just in DVD release?
I think so. I know people who've seen the trailers in theaters. So I think that there are going to be some screens that have it. There'll be a DVD available. I get nothing out of this. It was all volunteer effort on my part, so I can plug it. But I think what you're going to find is it's very helpful and assessing the situation, proposing solutions. And I would argue, I watched it with my teenage kids because I got an advanced copy of it, and they liked it. The animation's what hooked them. And I think it's a helpful way for teenagers and others to get a good sense real quick of what happened in the country.
That's what it takes. I've been a huge proponent of, I think if we're going to do anything to turn things around in any meaningful way, let's say get the information out, we need to start hitting the people where they live. During the football game, the basketball game, a 60-second infomercial for stuff like this. I know that takes dough, but man, if we could get something like this out there to the people, they're going to eat it up. This is a great educational tool. I want your money.
Well, you're a pioneer in that, Thayrone. Not everybody thinks of conservatism as some dry, dusty PBS show, but you're disproving that, and hopefully this movie can help do that, too.
Well, I used to work in PBS. I know just how dry and dusty that is. Listen, Thaddeus McCotter, thank you so much for being with us.